It's no secret that I'm a fan of all things knightly, but nowhere does this manifest more strongly than with my favourite Warhammer faction ever, the Bretonnians. As you can see over the years, I've acquired quite a collection, including 2 armies, one of which at 3,000 points is in this box right here. But you know what? Everything the last 10 years of doing all this TV stuff has all been in aid of just one purpose, because with the old world on the way, finally the moment has arrived. Finally, we're going to get to do a painting video on my most favourite miniature ever, the humble and yet perfect Knight of the Realm. When it comes to painting a valiant and glorious Bretonnian Knight, what you need to do is choose a good starting undercoat colour that works with that heraldry, because heraldry is the main thing, of course, when you're painting Bretonnians, but also you want something that's going to work for some smaller details. And what I find works out best when painting Bretonnians is to start with some of these generic smaller details, then just spend a bit of time on that heraldry afterwards. So for that reason, what I've gone for is standard grey from the Colour Forge, so nice medium grey, great starting point for any colour we might want to use here. And what we're going to do is look for those small parts first of all, and what I'm talking about here is things like armour and some parts on the horse as well. Now I have glued the miniature together with the rider on the mount. Some people prefer to keep these two separate to allow easier access to some details, but I find with these miniatures you don't really have to, but the choice of course is yours. But what we are going to do is start looking for one of the details that's scattered all across the whole assembly of the miniature, and that is the silver. In this case what I'm going to be using is some Surcoat silver, and I'm going to be applying it with a rough old base coating brush just to get things going quickly. What this is a medium base brush from Citadel. It's definitely seen better days, and I do have to be careful not to absorb too much water on a brush like this, so you can see I'm just removing excess, but it'll do the job nicely. As ever, we just need to thin the paint down with that little bit of water, and with that prepared, and with the brush not overloaded, it's time to start looking for anything that's going to be silver. So the obvious thing is, of course, going to be the armour underneath the Knight's surcoat, so we're looking at things such as his arm just there, and there's a bit on his leg down here too, but also there are some smaller details that are easy to miss, and I'm talking about things such as the bit in the horse's mouth, so you can see it's just around here, be sure to get that, and things like the horseshoes as well. Now you notice I'm not concerned at all about being neat at this stage, I'm just looking for anything that's going to be silver and making sure it's blocked in with this colour. I've finished base coating all that silver, and you can see things are looking pretty rough and ready, but that's okay because we're just looking for these early colours before we start doing any more detail work on there. And obviously this silver requires a black wash because it needs to look really clean and really polished, because this is a noble knight after all and not some filthy peasant. So what we're now looking for are some other colours that we can also wash black at the same time, and specifically I think doing some details on the horse is a good idea here. So what we're going to do is paint in the horsehair first of all with the appropriately named Noble Steed Brown, but I do encourage just vary the shades of brown you use across your army. But then for the hooves, we're going to pick them out with a little bit of Dust Bowl. But starting out with Noble Steed Brown, what I'm going for here is a size 2 brush from Artisopus, so quite a large base coating brush. The reason being these details are really easy to get to at this stage, so this is ideal for it. So we just need to make sure, as ever, it's thin with that touch of water and ready, and it's time to start looking for any bits of the horse that are poking out from underneath the armour. So for example, its leg just here, so I want to block this in entirely, just being careful not to get onto the metal of the horseshoe as we get down there. Also, don't forget to get the details around its face. So you can see there's a little hole here for the eye to come through. We've also got the ears and around its mouth as well. Once you've found all the horsehair, we're then ready to move into paint the hooves, and here I'm using some Dust Bowl, and I've gone for a smaller brush now. This is a size 1 from Artisopus, and this time we just need to be careful, just making sure we don't get this onto the brown of the horsehair or the silver of the horseshoe. And there we are, the hooves are painted in too, and I just want to quickly point out I also used Dust Bowl just to paint the back of his shield just in there as well. And with that done, it's now time for that black wash, and this is just to go over all the colours that we've painted in so far. I'm going to be using some Oblivion black for this, and to apply it I'm going for my size 2 brush again here, because we don't need to wash this over the entire model. Doesn't matter if it catches any details we haven't painted yet, but we must get over all that horsehair, the hooves and the silver that we've done so far. So I'm just going to load up a good amount on the brush here and then pick a starting point. So for example, could just be the the, say, his leg on the side just here. And all we've got to do is just run it straight over that detail, making sure it runs into all the nooks and crannies, gives us that shading and definition. So as I mentioned, it's got to be over all the silver, including his helmet up here, for example, but we want to make sure we get the other colours we painted too, including the hooves and the horsehair. The black wash is now completely dry, so it's time to move on to the big moment, because now we're going to start painting the heraldry onto this knight. And when it comes to this sort of thing with Bretonnians, it's actually quite a big part of the army, so it's worth thinking about it before you start doing it. And when you're collecting an army, you've got a choice here, because you could paint each knight completely differently, or you could do them all exactly the same, or you could have variations on the same colours. The choice really is up to you, but sooner or later you're probably going to have to create your own scheme here. So what we're going to do is just take a look at how to do this to get a really effective colour scheme on the tabletop. Basically, when it comes to Bretonnian heraldry, what you've got are 5 colours to choose from. So you've got black and white, and then you've got the primary colours. So you've got blue, yellow and red. Now you could argue green as well, but green is generally kept for the Green Knight, so usually that doesn't appear. So instead we're looking at those other 5. And those 5 colours break up into 2 categories. What you've got are metals and colours. Now when I say metals, what I'm specifically referring to is yellow and white, and these represent gold and silver. And then you've got the other 3 as just regular colours. And what you should try and do is stack these on top of each other. So for example, if you had a completely blue field on the heraldry of your knight, you should look to yellow or white as a symbol on top of it. And if you follow that guideline, what you'll find is the heraldry really pops out. Now you don't exclusively have to follow it, and you can certainly work around the sides a little bit, but generally speaking, this is what to do. And so in the case of our knight, what I've done is picked a classic Bretonnian colour scheme, which is actually to use both blue and red together and have them next to each other. That means for the symbol on top, what we need is something that's going to be yellow or white. So I've had a look at the transfer sheet and I've chosen a white one. I'm going to go for, where are we? This one just here. So this is actually a Pegasus, which will really show up quite nicely on top of some red and some blue. So that's what I want to go for. It's also appearing on the crest of the helmet of our knight, so it's ideal really. So what I'm going to do is start out with the blue. What I've picked out for this is some Witching Hour blue, and to apply it, I'm going to start out with my size 2 brush. And as is the case when you're painting something like this that appears on all sorts of details, just change brush as you need to, but as a starting point, this is good to get going. Now, as usual, I'm just going to get the paint thinned and ready. And what I've decided to do is to do a half-half scheme here. So on his shield, I'm going to look at the left-hand side and paint it blue entirely. So all blue down here. Then as we move on to the red, what we can do is do a neater application to make the other side red. Now this pattern then has to repeat across all the various shields that appear on him. So we don't have to worry about the little ones, but these larger ones here, such as the side of the barding, we definitely want the same scheme appearing on these. So it's going to be half blue on that side and half blue on this side. Now when it comes to the backing of this, you can play around a bit more. And for this, what I'm going to do is actually make it entirely blue on the front part around here. For the back part, that's going to be red. But on the other side, I'm going to flip it. So in this case, we're going to be looking at blue on the back and the red on the front. Now, as you're doing this, just keep an eye out for any other opportunities to put these 2 colours on the miniature. So, for example, we've got the fabric on the back of his helmet just here, but up here, I think this side will be good for this one being blue. We've also got this little binded part going around, so I'm going to alternate blue and red on this. So I'll start out with the blue on there. We've also got the pennant coming from his lance. Same thing here. What I'm going to do is have some blue and red on here. I think I'll start out with blue on this side. I've laid in the blue and you can see the areas I've picked out with it just here. And with that done, it's now time to move on to the other colour. So it's going to be red in this case. And I'm using some Sanguine Scarlet for this. And basically I'm just looking at applying it on all the parts that we've just missed out as we were doing the blue. So to apply it, I'm going for a slightly smaller brush now. Gone down to a size 1 for a bit more accuracy, because with this colour we now need to be as neat as possible as we get to that dividing line between the red and the blue. So with the paint thinned and ready, I'll start looking for those parts. And again, what I'll do is start out with the shield to be almost like a basis for everything that we're going to do beyond here. So always blue on the left and red on the right. So I just want to very carefully apply this in here. And I'm just going to colour in half the shield just there to make sure we've got a nice red on that part. But as I get to that central area, what I'm using is that bottom as a bit of a waypoint and just eyeing up roughly the middle at the top just here. So just around about there. And then with this downward motion, just going to bring it down and then adjust as I need to. You can always go back to the blue should things go a bit wrong, but it's basically this sort of motion just to get that nice neat line in the centre and then colour in the rest all the way around here. Now this is going to repeat across the knight, so if we look back at those little shield icons that appear on the side of the barding just here, again we're doing that downward motion, just being careful of his foot this time, but it's the same sort of principle, looking for that little point at the bottom and going straight up from there, just being careful of the blue as we get to the edge just there. Meanwhile, on this side, it's going to be the opposite, in that we're just doing red on here, but now going to bring the red down on the rest of this part of the caparison as well. So all the way around there, at the top here, everything like that. Same is going to be true for his surcoat, where it's this side that's going to be red, which goes up onto his body as well, and the details on the helmet, on the lance pennant, and around the top of the helmet too. And here we have the miniature with the red applied, and you can see how it goes back and forth across the miniature, but all of it started by just laying it out on the shield right there and just basically copying that pattern across the model. And you can see how, you got blue and red, look at the side of the model, blue and red, blue and red, blue and red, and so on. And with that done, what we can now do is start base coating some other colours in the miniature. And I'm going to start out with an off-white, really, a sort of like a darker white that we're going to build up to a white. Here I'm going to use some Griffon Claw. With that done, it's time to base coat all the leather, and I'm going to use some Boar Hide for this. And then finally, we definitely need some gold on there, so I'm going to use some Dragon's Gold. I'm going to start out with Griffon Claw, and the reason why I'm using this is because this is going towards white, which is the colour of the symbol that's going to go on our heraldry. So that's why I picked this one. It's almost like a third colour of the heraldic scheme, really. And to apply it, I'm going for my size 1 brush, but as usual, feel free to change as you need to. And with this colour, what I'm looking for are small details that we can just pick out with this colour, just to break things up a little bit. So I'm going to be looking at things such as the grips of his weapons, for example. So you see he's got a sword at his side just here. I'm going to do the grip of it just down here. Also the crest on his helmet being this Pegasus. This will match the symbol that's going to go on his heraldry too. So this is going to be blocked in with this colour too. Also other odds and ends. So there's this part on top of his surcoat just around here. Going to look for areas like that. So just details like this. I'm just going to block them in at this stage. Next up, we can base coat all the leather straps, and for this I'm using some Boar Hide. Now a lot of these are quite obvious, so for example these ones going around the horse barding just here, but there are some small ones that are easy to miss. For example, there's a little strap just here leading down to the stirrup, so just there. There's also a few very small ones on the back of his foot just going around here, and of course there's his belt and things, so just keep an eye out for all of these details at this stage. And then finally, it's time to apply some gold to the miniature. And here I'm using some Dragon's Gold, and I'm looking for little decorations and details that would be really nice picked out in a colour like this. So for example, the trim of the shield, you can see I'm applying this using the side of my brush just to skim along that upraised edge just there to get a neat line on it quickly. But also I'm looking for things such as these little shield designs on the side of the leather straps, and of course things like the weapons. So for example, his sword, I'm going to pick out the crossguard in this colour as well. And with that, we've now finished applying almost all of the base coats on the miniature, except for one that we're going to add later, which is going to be for the main haft of the lance, and that's going to be a pitch black, which I don't want to put a wash over, but all the colours we have on now, we can apply the same colour wash to, which is going to be a dark brown wash. And this is everything that we've added since we did that black wash. So in this case, I'm going to use some Battlemud Wash, and because we need some care in this application, I'm going to go for a size 2 brush here, just for a bit of control, because we need to avoid catching the silver armour or those horse parts that we painted earlier on that had the black wash over it. So I'm going to start with a generous amount on the brush and pick a good starting point. So for example, we could do some of the barding on the side just here. I'm just going to apply the wash towards the middle of that area, then start pushing it out from there. Now it will start out being quite heavy because of how much I had on the brush, but you can see I can just use that as a reservoir to start pushing it around. Then as I encounter areas such as the horse there, it's quite easy just to move up to those parts but not go over them. So you just need to apply this on now, and once you've got it on there, give it plenty of time to dry. This quantity of wash will take around about half an hour to dry before you're ready to move on to the next stage. And here we have the model with that brown wash completely dry. And at this stage, we've got one more base coat that we need to add, which is going to be a pitch black for the main haft of the lance. So in this case, what I'm going to use is some Doom Death Black. And to apply it, I'm going for a size 0 brush here for a bit of accuracy, because there's a few details that this needs to be painted in amongst at this stage. So as ever, once the paint is ready and thinned down, so just making sure that brush isn't overloaded, we can start looking for this feature. And it's this main body of it just around here. And you can see it's a bit tricky as we get close to the pennant, where you just have to work in amongst the fabric. But really, it's just a matter at this stage of base coating this main body of the lance. And here we have the model with all those base coats applied. And when it comes to the main haft of that lance, remember you can do different colours if you want to. So you could do wooden browns, for example. You could paint it white. The choice is yours. But with all this done, the base coats are now completed and also the washes. So now we can move into layering the miniature to clean up these colours before we go on to highlight it. And we may as well start out with those heraldic colours. So I'm going to go back to the original blue we used, which was Witching Hour Blue. And this time to apply it, I'm using my size 1 brush because with this case, we're going to layer it. So we're going to be reapplying it to the blue areas, but just being careful to avoid any recessed parts that are darker so we retain the shading that we got in those parts. So to get this ready, just make sure your paint's nice and thin on your palette and under control, and then we can start identifying these parts, such as the blue that we've got just around here. This time we're looking for flat areas such as the shield design just here where we can reapply it onto the flat part to make that colour nice and bright once more. Just being careful when we get close to that red. Remember, just taking our time as we get the two colours meeting just there. But you can see we've got that darker outline going around the outside of this symbol here. So what we want to do is retain that as we approach the blue here by not going quite up to that dark area. So you see I'm going close to it, but not quite into the corner, so we retain the shading. Same is going to be true here as we go towards that leather. Just going to be applying the blue into the middle of this area like that to get that blue back, but to keep the shading as well. Now on the fabric, keep an eye out for any parts where it folds inwards, so we want to keep shading there too. So around here, for example, it does happen. I'm just going to follow the crest of that curve just there, then skip past the darker part and carry on again on this side. And once again, just around here, we've got another little curve just there to avoid. So I'm just going to go for the raised up area there like that. So now it's just a matter of doing this across all the blue, just taking your time, looking for those flatter raised areas and layering over the top of them. Once you've finished that layering, you can see the blue is nice and bright once more, so now we need to do the same on the red. And so in this case, it's straight back to that colour we originally used, so Sanguine Scarlet in our case here, again layered on using the same technique. So I'm using the size 1 brush once more, and it's a matter of just making sure it's nice and thin and under control, and then applying this onto the red segments now, using the same technique as what we've just done. So again, looking to avoid any recesses, such as just around here. I think we've got the flat part of this shield design, which we can just layer completely over, but as I get close to those edges, it's time to be careful and make sure it stays darker in the recessed areas. And with that, you can see the heraldic scheme is now nice and bright and clean once more. So no matter what colour scheme you've gone for or what patterns, always be sure to layer the heraldry colours because you need to make sure they're nice and bright before you move on. But there are still a few other colours that we should do some layering on just now because he is a knight after all and not a filthy peasant, so we want to make these colours all nice and bright and shiny. So what we're going to do is take a look at that off-white first of all, almost the third colour of the heraldry here. What we're going to do is go back to using Griffon Claw first of all, and then we'll take it further with some Ivory Tusk to a near white. But we'll start out with Griffon Claw, and with this we want to layer it in the same sort of way as what we just did with those other two colours, with the red and the blue. And so it's a matter of using the same brush, still got my size 0 here, and with this we're now looking for the parts that we base coated with this colour. We want to layer these too. So for example, the crest and the helmet, you can see the Pegasus we got up here. We're looking for those flat areas once more and just want to be careful to avoid the recessed parts. So we're just going to follow that wing just down here, just being careful not to drop into the recess right there, skip past the darker part and carry on again on the other side. I've finished layering there with Griffon Claw, and I just want to add a bit of variety onto this tone just here because you can see there's some fabrics painted with that colour, but also some more solid materials such as the crest on the helmet. So now moving on to some Ivory Tusk, and this is going to be another layer on these parts that are more solid materials. So we're looking at the crest, also this shield down here, and it's the same process as with the previous layering where I'm looking to avoid the recesses. Now, because we've got that Griffon Claw on there already, you can see what we're getting now is a nice smooth result with this colour very quickly and very easily. So certainly a smoother result than we would have got had we just skipped past Griffon Claw on these details. With that selection of colours done, you can see we've got some really nice whites starting to appear there in the miniature and a nice variety of tones for the different layers of armour as well, but there's still a little bit of layering that we need to do. Starting with the horse's hair once again, we need to go back to the original colour that we used here too. So in our case, that's Noble Steed Brown, and then we need to make that armour really nice and shiny to show it's been polished. So here, I'm going to go back to Surcoat Silver, and for the gold, some Dragon's Gold. First of all, what we need is that Noble Steed Brown, and to apply it I'm using my size 0 brush still, and this time with the layering around the face, just do as we did before, and that we're looking for the raised up flatter areas. So for example, around the horse's muzzle just down here, because he's got his nose to work around, so we're just looking for the parts that stand out and the flat areas down the middle. Just want to get areas there like that, just being careful not to go quite to that leather strap or down into the nostril. But when you get down to the legs, what you can do is just add a little bit of texture to this for the horse hair, and it's just a matter of painting it as lines going in the direction of the growth of the hair. So you don't have to cover absolutely everything. Still like layering in that we're looking to avoid deeper recesses, but just approaching like this will just give up a little bit of texture for the horse's hair. Next up, we can return to Surcoat Silver to layer the plate parts of the armour. So don't worry about any chainmail, but instead the flatter parts such as the helmet, we want this to be nice and shiny and polished. So again, we're looking for the flatter areas and we just need to apply a thin coat of this colour on those parts. In addition, if your miniature does have a sword drawn or even has a lance tip, be sure to do this too so it's nice and shiny as well. Once you finish doing that on the silver plates, we're then ready to move on to the gold, for which we're going to be doing the same sort of thing. So back to Dragon's Gold, layering once again, looking for the flat parts and being careful to avoid the recesses. And with that stage done, the layering is now complete. And I think you'll agree, the knight is looking pretty heroic, pretty noble and glorious, but now what we need to do is really make him look particularly glorious by adding some highlights onto the miniature. And this sort of thing is entirely optional, but if you want to do it, it's always a good idea to start out with the main colours, which in our case is going to be the heraldry. So what we need now is a lighter blue to begin with, then we'll move on to the red. So for the blue, I'm going to use some Leviathan Blue, and to apply it, I'm going for a fine brush here. I've got a size 00 for this, and with this colour, we're looking to accentuate any part that stands out. So any creases, any edges, that sort of thing. So just make sure the paint's thin down for that purpose and under control on your brush. You won't need loads and loads of it, so about that is fine. And we can start looking for these edges. And so, for example, if we take a look at his surcoat that we've got down the side just here, you can see we've got a whole host of creases. We're looking for the peaks of them where they're standing at the most, and we just want to follow along those parts with this blue. So along there, for example, then we've got one just here. We just want to use the tip of the brush in this downward motion just to follow that edge to help it stand out, going along there. Same on this crease just up here. Now, as we get to the hem of it, we also want to follow the outside of the hem. And in this case, it's actually a bit more comfortable to turn the brush around like this and use the side of the brush to follow along the edge, but basically that sort of thing there. Now, this will also include any blue parts that are on the horse, and we do have the comparisons down here. So for the outside trim here, what I'm going to do is again follow the outside, so going all the way around there, and you can actually use the side of the brush to get areas like this because it's nice and easy to access them. As long as you do the sweeping motion, you can see you get a highlight very quickly. And again, we're looking for the creases such as this one just here. And there's also one just here. And sometimes these creases do go up onto the shield design, which brings me to these shields just here. What you can do is highlight around the edges of these if you want to, but because the comparison here is the same sort of colour selection of what we got here, so you see blue on blue, I want to get a bit more of a distinction there. So I'm actually going to leave it for the time being, come back to that later on with a white outline, which will make that pop out really nicely. So instead I'm just going to leave those shields, but carry on looking for any other edges and creases and picking them out in this way. And with that, all the blue is now highlighted, so we can move on to the other main colour, which is going to be that red. And in this case, what I'm going to go for is some Demon Red. So a nice highlight appropriate to the midtone that we've got on there. And to apply it, I'm going for the same technique. So I'm just going to use the same brush here, that size 00 once again. And just like with the blue, what we need to do is make sure that red's thinned down and ready and that the brush isn't overloaded. And with that prepared, then we're starting to look for all the sharper edges that appear on the red details. So for example, on his surcoat just here, I'm just looking to pick out the parts that are really standing out, so the tops of these creases, and just follow them all the way down. And with that, the red parts of the heraldic scheme are highlighted, but we do need to do the white parts of it too. So I'm going to move on to that now. And because we've got two tones of white going off in the miniature just here, with like a darker one, then a more bright one, we're going to be doing two highlights for it. So we'll start out by highlighting the fabrics using some Ivory Tusk. Then for the parts that we layered with Ivory Tusk earlier on, so the solid parts, we'll use some White Star for these. But first of all, what we need is Ivory Tusk, and to apply it, I'm definitely sticking to the same brush here, the size 00 for lots of control, because we're looking for the same sort of process as what we just did with the colours. So we're looking for the edges and corners and things like that. So for example, if we take a look at the reins, which I left with Griffon Claw, I'm going to be highlighting this part. So I'm just going to use the side of the brush and just skim across the top edge of it to get a nice highlight running along that corner there like that. So same process with all the corners and the edges. Now this colour does also bring us back to the shield designs that we've got on the comparison, because this colour is a great one to outline this so it pops out nicely. So what this is going to be is a very careful edge highlight following it around. I'm just going to make sure I'm approaching with the tip of the brush, almost the side of it, and just skimming along that outer edge with as fine a line as possible, following it all the way around. I finished applying that highlight, and you can definitely see what a big difference it makes on the barding just there. And so with that done, we can now move on to highlighting with a pure white. And here I'm using some White Star. These are for the parts that we layered with Ivory Tusk earlier on. So for example, the crest and the helmet, I'm now looking for the sharper edges and corners up here. And wherever possible, just picking them out with a bit of this colour. So for example, around the curvature of the wing just there, following where the light would catch, and just bringing that all the way down to there. With that done, all the heraldic parts of the scheme are now highlighted, and I'm sure you'll agree he looks unbelievably heroic as befitting of a Bretonnian knight, but now what we need to do is highlight some other details on there, starting out with the silver and the gold. Now for the silver, I'm going to go for Mythril Blade, and for the gold, some glistening gold, so some nice shiny colours here. But starting out with Mythril Blade, going for the small brush once again, that size 00, and here there's a few little parts that we need to pick out in particular ways. So we'll start out with the armour. When it comes to the armour, it's going to be a straight edge highlight here. So you can see these plates we've got on the shoulder. What we're looking for is to use the tip of the brush and just follow the outside edge all the way around as neatly as possible, making that line as fine as we can. So you can see I'm just angling the model to make sure I'm comfortable, applying the paint in this downward motion, and when the angle changes, just turn the model to make sure that we stay comfortable, and this way we have the control in getting to those parts. Now, as you're doing this stage, you will also encounter chainmail that needs to be highlighted. When it comes to the chainmail, such as this part poking out under the barding just here, just make sure you don't have much paint on your brush. You can always use your thumb just to remove some excess, and just lightly brush it across it, so it's almost like a dry brush, just picking out the raised links there like that. So nice and quick and easy. Finally, on the leather parts, there are these studs that are, well, in the leather, and in this case, all we've got to do is dot these two. So for example, these ones here, just use the tip of your brush just to dot each of these out. And then finally, we can move on to highlighting the gold using some glistening gold. And this is going to be the exact same process of what we've just done on the silver, always making sure that we're comfortable, looking for those sharp edges and just skimming along each one. Now that's done, you can see we've got a really wonderful shine appearing on all those metallics, and so we've actually only got a few details left to highlight, and we're looking at the leather now. For this I'm going to go for some fur cloak, then for the horse we need a lighter brown that we used for that original base coat, so in this case I'm going to use some dry rust brown. But I'm going to start out with some fur cloak, and to apply it I'm going for the same brush again because it's very much the same sort of technique here. We're looking for any sharp angles, edges, anything like that, and we just want to follow along them with this colour. So with the paint ready, we can start looking for these features, such as the sword that we've got just down here. Just want to get the outside edge of it. So you can see along here, I can just skim along with the side of the brush. This way we get a nice highlight following that edge really quickly and really easily. And with that done, we can then move on to highlighting the horse using some dry rust brown. And here I'm just looking for parts that stand out, that catch the light. So for example, on its knee just here, you can see I'm just looking for these almost edges really, and also the top of it just going along there. And as we get further down, we've got some quite distinct texture with all this hair just around the hoof just here. So what I'm going to do is just follow along with that with a few lines to pick out this texture too. And there we are, all the colours are now highlighted on our noble knight, but there are a few little details in the horse's face that we should pick out at this stage, and to do it what we need first is a pitch black to paint the eyes, and here I'm going to use some Doom Death Black, and we're just going to add a little touch of a Neil White to the back of them, so here I'm going to use some Ivory Tusk. Finally, we need to paint its teeth. In this case, Griffon Claw will be perfect. But first of all, what we need is a black. So I'm going to use some Doom Death Black, and to apply it, I'm still using a small brush because this detail is going to be very small here. All you need is some of this thin down nicely on your palette, and then all we're going to do is paint the entirety of each eye. So if we look at this side just here, just want to carefully approach it from this angle, so we're going along the length of the eye, and it's just a matter of running that paint into the recessed area. So just in there. Once that's done, we can then move on to some Ivory Tusk, and with this, all we need to do is add just a little dot of this colour to the back of each eye on the horse. So just very carefully move in with the tip of the brush, just add a little dot in around there. And then finally, we just need a small amount of Griffon Claw, and with this we just need to pick out the teeth, so just a matter of just applying a few little dots onto the texture around here. Now with this done, it's then time to apply the transfers onto your knight, and once that's done we can come back and add one more effect onto the miniature. With those transfers applied, our noble knight is now really looking the part, and there's actually an important thing when it comes to transfers like this, because you can see what we've got here is a Pegasus Rampant. When it's a creature like this that's facing a particular direction, so in this case it's facing that way right there, if it's on the other side, you have to make sure you flip them so it's still facing forward, otherwise it gives the impression that the animal's running away. So be sure to just keep that in mind, make sure that its face is always pointing forward in the direction the miniature is going. And with that done, we're now going to move on to one more detail which is entirely optional. That's just have a little bit of dust being kicked up on the comparison, so at the bottom of the miniature. And if you want to do this, always make sure you apply your transfers first because it might go over them a little bit. For it, what we need is a nice neutral sort of brown colour. I'm going to use some Dust Bowl for this, and to apply it, we're going to dry brush it on. So you just need a small dry brush like this one here. All you got to do is just get a little bit of that paint on your brush, work it into the bristles on some tissue paper, and carry on until not much is appearing on the texture of the paper. So down to about this sort of point here. Once you reach that stage, all you need to do is start applying it along the bottom of the comparison down here. So it's almost a stippling motion to put it on, just like this, just to build it up steadily so you get a dusty appearance along the bottom of the miniature. Now with this done, it's time to base your model, and the basing scheme is of course entirely up to you, but in this case I'm going to go for a grasslands base to represent the fields of Bretonnia. And with the base now fully painted, Sir Francois the Brave is ready to ride forth to glory and honour. So as you've seen, despite the reputation Bretonnian Knights have for being complicated to paint, they aren't really, because the actual mechanics of painting them aren't that much different from any other miniature. The key thing is working out your heraldry. So remember the rules that we went through earlier on of having your metals and colours and stacking them on top of each other. And if you follow this guideline, you'll find your heraldic schemes are really effective. Now when it comes to painting an army, you can of course paint all your knights the same, do all the peasants the same and make everything match with the overall same colour scheme. But if you want to go for that more classic appearance like the old school knights where they're all different colours, there are a few key things to make sure that you do to be sure the army ties together. The first is that you absolutely must base everything consistently so it all looks like it belongs together on the tabletop. The second thing is a little tip, and that is to use the same shades of particular colours across the force. So for example, the red I used here, I'd use that same combination to make red on every knight and also on all the peasants. And then for blue, I'll be doing the same thing. And if you keep the colours consistent like this, again, it helps tie everything together. But anyway, we hope you have fun painting your Bretonnians. I sure do, so we'll see you on the battlefields of the old world soon.